Welcome to another episode of Catalyzing Radical Systemic Change, where in my own words, it's all about discovering, mapping, and cross-pollinating the various building blocks to unlock a planetary civilization in this lifetime. And I really think culture is such an integral part of the great transition we're all in. And I've been pondering a lot over what's the relationship in between personal transformation, meaning me as an individual, as Alistair, or as my two guests, as Rufus and Sylvie. How does personal transformation relate to cultural transformation, and how this does relate to ultimately the systemic transformation we all wish to unlock? So it's a tradition in my podcast that the guests introduce themselves and link some of the pivotal moments in their biography and tie them back into today's topic. So today's topic is Life Itself. That's the nonprofit organization from Rufus and Sylvie and many other beautiful human beings. And the new white paper that I just received maybe some 10 days ago, and was really curious how can we consciously steward cultural evolution to unleash a second renaissance? So without further ado, the floor is yours. And yeah, I'm just curious, how do you link a pivotal moment in your biography back to today's topic in the podcast?
Great. Well, thank you very much for having us. So I'm Sylvie, and my personal background is that I'm an artist who also trained around design. And about 10 years ago, I found myself living in Florence, and it was something really magical to live in a city where I had experienced a real sense of community, but also where beauty, art was very central, and you really felt a deep connection to history, to that area era where there was a lot of creativity, artistically and humanly. There was a real sense that there was a birthplace of something new in terms of a culture. Then basically fast forward about 6 years later, I'm pregnant with our son, and I'm doing a performance art in an exhibition called Is There a Future? Where you had women who were wondering and decided to go on a birth strike because they felt that with the climate crisis and the political inaction.
So I'm curious how you would apply that when you look into the rear view mirror of life itself and the multiple cohorts run and so forth. And then, yeah, just make it an open-ended conversation, horizon 1, 2, 3 of life itself through the rear view mirror and looking into the crystal ball into the future. Just curious to listen into that, and specifically trying to put an emphasis, like, what are the ripple effects beyond those, like, let's say, boundary settings of those people in the cohorts that are joining you in Bergerac?
Yeah, I think maybe even to step maybe to horizon 3 and come backwards. In the Second Renaissance kind of second white paper, which is on the kind of how this comes about, there's this idea of these pockets that form, of where the future paradigm is sort of being tried out, experimented with, these kind of hotbeds of cultural evolution and inner development and outer practice. And there's also the formation of movement. So the basic thesis is what happens is you have these kind of pockets forming, maybe they network together, but also at the same time, there's this kind of movement gathering where people start to self-identify, or, the pockets are not just like isolate, they're like, oh, we're part of something bigger. So the basic theory of change that life itself is committed to, and at the moment, is that, like, nurturing these seeds of a second Renaissance, both this movement and these pockets. So not just this hub is a prototype, but more generally, we're interested in just like helping others and help there being more of these pockets, and that could be businesses, it could be online groups, it could be physical things. There's a reason why we think physical co-living, the intensity, even if it's in a neighborhood or a village, the intensity and the regularity of interaction is pretty crucial to maintaining this being different, because fundamentally you are basically in a somewhat hostile environment. Like the mainstream society, the mainstream world don't believe these things so much. It's harder to make a living. It's harder to sustain your practice. It's not like this is common. So fundamentally, more pockets connected together, transformative regions, even that would be a dream, and a budding movement. So the question would be, how does that, kind of stepping back through the horizons, like 30, 40, 50 years from now, if there were dozens of regions all over the world which are like kind of pioneering a second renaissance, if there's a growing global or local movement of people with obviously a great variation of perspectives, but like, wow, we want a paradigmatic shift, we know that the inner dimension is crucial, etc., that would be amazing. And then like, well, how does that start? Kind of coming back through Horizon 2 and 1 is, well, you need more of these spaces to start up, and you need more people to come to those kind of spaces or find out about them or believe they should be created. And that's where even like the Second Renaissance white paper is kind of like, it loops on itself. It's both setting out a vision, but one of the reasons we even chose
to birth ourselves.
Yeah. I mean, I'm so touched. I'm a guy, so I think I can't even truly put myself into the body of a woman giving birth to a child. What I can totally relate to is the grief around modernity that I think I grew up with through the umbilical cord. Having grown up in an activist family, and also the sense of the simultaneity of the seedlings of a new civilization that we sense, and certainly what the three of us and the many people around us are working for, but also the intense parallel emotions, right? And in order to be able to contain them, not only personally, we need community. So yeah, very touched with that, with that, sharing of your story. Rufus, do you mind tying into that, like a moment from your biography?
Sure. I mean, there are like several points I could look at in my life. I think one also that led into me meeting Sylvie in 2015, and which was like kind of also the seeding of life itself. We wrote the first manifesto together. So in 2013, I'd been running something called Open Knowledge Foundation, which had been this nonprofit I had built up, and for over like nearly a decade at that point. And my father had got diagnosed with a terminal illness, a terminal lung illness that there's no cure for. And he'd been given kind of a few years to live. In the end, he passed away in 2019. And I went on a special holiday with him after this kind of diagnosis. And I remember we went to the US, and I was getting up at like 5 a.m. in the morning to talk with my team in Europe, basically, and work on this launch of this project. And I wasn't even having breakfast with my father. I mean, I spent the rest of the day with him, but I just remember having this real presence of like, what was I doing? It was a nonprofit I was running, and stuff, but I really was confronted with that. And I think also there was a funny thing of also interaction with my father, which is this organization was all about sharing information more widely. We were involved in open data and technology stuff. But I realized that I'd really never really changed my father's mind on anything. So there was this combination of just like not being present with him. And I realized I needed, I was going to leave Open Knowledge, which I did over the next kind of year and a half, which is an amazing organization, by the way. But I just really realized I was lost, and that I also realized that really what I'd been doing, while it was beneficial, wasn't really making the difference that I would like to contribute. I'd always been motivated by this desire to make a real contribution somehow socially. And, crudely put, it was like I realized that open knowledge wasn't open minds, and that open minds were much more important. And I had no idea. Now, I was, first of all, a bit of an arrogant asshole that didn't listen nearly as much as I should do. That was also confronted at that period. There was a lot of difficulties at the organization. So that led into this moment of just really questioning and what really is a path to a radically wiser, weller world. And also, how can I be wiser? I am, really seeing the unwisdom I'd had in my life was also part of that. And that led me into meeting kind of Sylvie, at a real change in my life and a real shift in focus to this kind of area of, inner and outer change interwoven.
Yeah, also here I'm really touched because, again, what I sense is the simultaneity. Your partner shared birthing a new human baby onto the planet, and you shared the process of accompanying your father in the last days and weeks and months and years. So I wonder if this simultaneity of emotions may be one of the common features that I certainly recognize in my whole life. I think there barely passes a week, at least, where I don't feel at the same time the stress, the burden, the overwhelm, the tight benchmarks, everything getting quicker, now supported by AI, like exponential growth curves. All of us, or many of us, sensing, there may be some really messy times ahead, but nevertheless, meditating, praying, doing the personal work, and striving to build something more beautiful. So I feel, just to give after this like very human preface almost for the podcast, I wonder, I think it's a good start to basically frame for the listeners what is actually a theory of change, and then tie that into your theory of change. For me, a theory of change is when you have an organization, could be for purpose, for profit. In this case, we're talking about a non-profit organization, Life itself, that beyond the own organizational boundaries wants to reach a certain impact in society. And I wonder, for the sake just of clarity of language and being precise with language, Rufus, is there anything, maybe I'm just handing over to Rufus, is there anything particularly around the framework of the theory of change that you want to share with the listeners before we basically map the different building blocks in the theory of change and then like disentangle them, almost like disentangle and reassemble them?
Yeah, well, I think there are two things briefly to say for me, which in this kind of area. I mean, first of all, for us, is this not just a kind of theory of change, I guess, for life itself, but what would lead to a radically wiser, weller world? What would lead to the kind of paradigm shift that I think many of the people listening to this podcast, or many people out there, start to feel, right? That is really needed. That it's not just small tweaks here and there. It's not just the iPhone upgrade of a bigger screen, a little bit better capitalism, a little bit better here, or a little bit of change. Something deep has to happen. But how does that actually come about? What does that look like? And I guess the metaphor I have for myself also here is that one thing that seems important is we kind of sometimes talk about this idea of the double helix, that you need both kind of theory and a vision and an actual kind of work through idea of how you realize that vision, and you need practice. You need these two things woven together. And that often what you might see is that lots of people doing amazing work, but without maybe much grounding in like, how does this actually work out, get us to the destination. Or the other hand, people with incredible theory or incredible ideas, but it's not really embodied in practice. And so the aspect of having a kind of relatively rigorous theory of change, really relatively worked out way that you're actually going to realize this wiser world and what does it look like, I think is really important. I mean, to end, maybe the other metaphor for me is looking at my own life. There was a lot of emphasis for quite a period on being effective, or, you know, being really going far. But if you're going far in the wrong direction, you're actually going away from your destination. You know, maybe we've all had that in our experience of where when we misread the map, maybe it doesn't happen with GPS anymore. You know, the faster we go in our car, the faster we're actually going away from where we want to go. And so this aspect of like being quite, I think part of wisdom is this balance between really thinking quite a bit about where we're going and how we're going there, as well as being like, oh, we want to be very kind of efficient or effective at going there. And so that, I think, is also why we think having quite a worked through theory of change, in this case, the Second Renaissance white paper and others, is really valuable. I don't know if there's anything you want to add.
I might add that it's important that the practice and the embodiment inform the theory, and vice versa. The theory informs the embodiment practice. That it's an alchemy of both. That when they're disconnected, you go in the beautiful world of ideas, but do they work? Are we able to ground them and produce them? And it's easy in the world of idea to create a perfect world, and vice versa. In just focusing just purely on the embodiment and the practice, you might lose track of where does that sit in a greater picture. Where does that sit into a greater direction? So the interflow is really something we believe is crucial to the birthing of Second Renaissance.
What I love is when me as the host, I get an inner picture, which I reckon I will never forget, because it's really an oddity that when you said the double helix, I never connected theory and practice through this beautiful picture of the double helix. And I truly believe that in order to be able to navigate the complexity of this transition we find each other in, which you, Rufus, mentioned, is not about some tweaks here or there, or just painting, something on a surface level in a different color. It really is a deep, radical transformation, in my language, I would say, towards a planetary civilization where we recognize as the dominant species on the planet, ultimately we're the stewards of the other sentient, but also the other non-sentient entities. Just because we seemingly perceive the mineral estate or the plant kingdom not as sentient, at least many, maybe not, I think it becomes very clear that as the dominant species, we actually don't have another opportunity in the century, I reckon, maybe a little bit longer, maybe a little bit shorter, I don't know, to really become aware, to become stewards for the many generations after us. So I'm curious when you say the double helix, and one of which is the practice, right? The practice of personal transformation, cultural transformation. What are the theoretical foundational building blocks in your theory of change when you want to unleash the Second Renaissance? So I would like to stay a little bit on the theory side,
Yeah.
but feel both invited to directly tie them back into the practice around them.
So I think we could tell a little bit of the basically narrative of a Second Renaissance. I also want to emphasize in that word, like theory, I would say sometimes maybe more a narrative that's coherent, and there are multiple, there are other narratives, and it's kind of good to, it's not a sole version. I mean, maybe just to set out the Second Renaissance thing, which is kind of a distillation or a framing of a story that I think might be relatively familiar to at least quite a few of your listeners. Roughly, we joke sometimes of this kind of four noble beliefs of a Second Renaissance. So one is that there's something seriously not working. There's real societal crises happening, unfolding, that are potentially catastrophic and even existential, that threaten both human life, but life of many other species and our planet. Number two is like, what is the source of that illness or that breakdown? I mean, as we say, if you have a headache, it may just be a headache. And if you're treating it with aspirin, that's fine. If you actually have like a blood clot, it would be really crucial to get treatment urgently. So diagnosis really matters. And we could kind of go through that in the second Renaissance, what that is. Third, in the paper and in the site. And number three is then, change is possible. Cultural change, a radically wise world is possible. It's not certain. It may not even be probable right now, but it's not like, oh, well, this is the best we've got. One, I think, major problem of the world today is either there's kind of suppression or denial of the state we're in, or once you confront it, the difficulty can often just be hopelessness. Oh my God, maybe we don't even deserve as a species. I mean, we're almost like a cancer, it could be at one level, or just there's no way out. So the third point is, well-being, or, relative utopia. Transformation is possible. Number four of that, and what does that world look like? And we talk a little bit about that, which is, what is well-being? It's a wiser society. It's a regenerative civilization. It's one of realizing our interconnectedness with the world and with us, with each other and with nature, and so on. And there's some more detail, I think, being specific about that a little bit. And obviously it's emergent and much to be said. And finally, kind of part four is, well, what is the path to that world? And spelling that out in a bit of detail. And so that's something that the kind of Second Renaissance project and the white paper, it was really worth going through. I mean, and just to ground this, we're in the hub in Bergerac, the life, in the practice side. We're in Bergerac in Southwest France, in the Life Itself hub here, which has been like a conscious co-living experiment now for 4 years. We've seen like hundreds, if not now nearly 1,000 people come through here. And one of the reasons, again, is that while we see loads of people come through who are clearly sensing, something's wrong, that that change is really needed, we also saw a huge, I wouldn't even just say variety, but often confusion on the next parts. Like, what is really the matter? Is it blockchain that we need? Is it effective altruism? Is it this? Is it permaculture? And maybe we need all of those things, but how do they actually weave together? How do they coherent? Which are maybe more important or less important right now? What is actually the source of the climate crisis truly, etc.? And so putting this paper together, which we claim is really a distillation of integral work, meta-modern, the great turning of Joanna Macy, many, many threads that went into it. But having this distillation of the what and why and the how, we think is really kind of important in that metaphor again, which is if you don't know where you're going, you're maybe going very fast in the wrong direction. I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that, just setting that out, and then why the theory is.
Well, I would say it's also a theory that is not just, it's a theory grounded in practice, grounded in observation and empirical in a way. It's not a theory of like up in the air. It's really by really looking at ourselves, and also I want to go back again to in history and really observing, because history is a science. It's like what the trace is, maybe an imperfect science, but it's the traces of what is left, is the traces of what was actually tried out and what failed and what succeeded, which gives you a sense of like, gives you some clues. And I do believe that the diagnosis is really important. Taking the time to have a correct diagnosis, or at least aiming to have it as correct as possible, is really crucial, because specifically when we're in a moment of uncertainty that often leads to panic, there's a sense of just wanting to get it fixed or revive something. But actually, as it goes more chaotic, is when you need to slow down to really look and really observe. And that in itself is a practice, is a very deep practice.
And so maybe to make that concrete in terms of both diagnosis, very crudely, you could say that there are kind of 3 or 4 ways of looking at kind of the source of our issues, and also then what we may do about it. One is like what we could call techno solutionists. Our technology or our, in some way is the source. So to solve climate change, we just need more solar, electrify the grid, switch to electric cars. That's the solution. And I don't know, Bill Gates, you see this kind of out there. The next solution is what I would call structural solutionism. If only we had better governance, if only we had more citizens' assemblies, if only we had a kind of, this is techno governance, but like a blockchain system where we can kind of, I don't know, pay for carbon. You have this in like Kim Stanley Robinson book, for example, the Ministry for the Future. If only we had better governance, you see this famously in socialism and Marxism, that will solve the problem. That's how we get to utopia. And if we only all own the means of production. And then what we at Life Itself, we call kind of like ontological cultural solutionism, which is a priority of that. It's like, oh no, those things matter. Of course we need technology. Of course we need governance change. But fundamentally, the root of these issues, the profound issues we have, go to our ways of being and knowing and our culture and seeing our culture.
Yes, our way of perceiving ourselves and perceiving the world. Because that informs what we value as important. That informs as what we even think is possible. And culture is the big iceberg that you only see the top, but it's so deep. The roots go so deep, and they are slower to transform. It's not a quick fix. It's very likely multi-generational. And I think also, having been raised in a culture that is used to speed, wanting to have a fast solution, there's maybe sometimes an aversion to kind of look at solutions that are multi-generational, and also requires us to let go of part of our deepest attachment, which is how we identify, how we construct our identity. And it's, I want to maybe also go into, we do see seeds of more and more interest in personal growth, inner development. And it's still sometimes, kind of like, oh, I'm going to disconnect from the world and I'm going to meditate on my cushion, or I'm going to, develop personally to, in order for my personal life to get better. But there's something of that inner growth at the service of something bigger than ourselves. That is, when you transform yourself and, that you're interbeing with the collective and society, there's something that puts a bigger context that I think is very important and necessary. So that when, I don't know, suddenly you had a breakthrough in relationship, you don't stop your growth. I'm like, oh, I got what I wanted. And, I go back with life. It's like, no, you're doing that not just for yourself, but as an ancestors for the future generation, for what it means to be a human being, that we relate differently to what it means to be a human being for ourselves and the future generations.
And maybe to also to add one kind of thing then that illustrates about the theory and the empirics, kind of the interweaving, which is some of the things we're saying. I hope many people might be just like nodding along and saying, yeah, integral, there's the 4 quadrants, we need the inner and the outer. And one of the things I guess that really had struck us, but also struck me personally, was okay, how does this actually happen? So how does cultural evolution happen, but also inner transformation? You know, one of the shocking things for me when I was younger was at one point I took psychedelics, and I remember this just vivid experience for me. It was so powerful. It both really shifted my life, but also having this experience. I remember the metaphor of like I was holding water in my hands, and you know, it flows out of your hands gradually. And these powerful insights that I would have kind of would just flow away. Or I remember a friend who actually became eventually a Buddhist monk, but he would come back from retreat and I would come back from retreat in our 20s and we'd be like, what's the half-life of this? And we'd like bet, like, even though we really wanted to keep practicing, we're like, what is the betting that 6 weeks from now back from retreat, we are still sitting in the morning? And it's this kind of shocking, I think there's this kind of shocking fact. So there's both the possibility on one side that transformation personally and collectively is possible because we see it. You know, we have powerful experiences personally. We also see, you know, the Renaissance. We see the past, that major shifts have happened and that it's how hard it is. And so one of the other things in the how here is like, okay, we have had a lot of like falling on the floor, hitting our face here at Life Itself. You know, like we've seen how we've been doing a lot of experimentation over the last decade we've been around of just like, oh, wow, you know, this is not easy. It's not easy for people to live together, for example, even for a month, you know, and, you know, how does conflict get dealt with? You know, just all of these like prosaic things coming back to this question of, well, yeah, it sounds great that we want to consciously evolve or shift our consciousness, but doing that at even the scale of 10 people in a household or 10, you know, a village is actually quite difficult. And this is where you know, there's both the hope and the challenge. And so this brings us to the how part of the second Renaissance, that if you're interested in that, one of the conclusions that we came to was, well, how do most parts, if you look at the first Renaissance, it doesn't happen everywhere all at once. Or you look at something even more recent, like gay rights or women's rights. It doesn't happen all over the world at once. It starts in pockets. So in the first Renaissance, there was Florence. You go to the Reformation, it starts in certain places. Or you look at, you know, gay rights, you know, famously San Francisco or Stonewall in, you know, areas of New York. So we think that this kind of change is going to happen in pockets. Now, those pockets could be physical pockets, people living in conscious neighborhoods, as we call it, but more generally conscious collectives. That could be businesses. It could be online communities. As I said, it could be co-living. It could be a variety of these things. But but the kind of features that we came to suggest, and so our hypothesis that people both in those pockets share some kind of vision, what we call a second Renaissance vision, but a vision of this kind of paradigmatic shift. And secondly, that they are crucial to this second Renaissance is this inner development, personally and collectively, and in multiple dimensions, in the, you know, the waking up, the cleaning up, the growing up, the showing up, to use that slightly integral terminology.
Yeah, let me, because there was so much shared already. And even though it's my podcast and I choose the people I invite, there's not that many people, you know, who are that familiar with the integral framework. So I'm just trying to summarize what I got, which got me excited in the white paper, that I have the feeling this like double helix, right, is really like based in solid theory and interwoven with conscious practice. So what I got is basically the understanding that personal transformation, cultural transformation, and systemic or societal transformation at large are somewhat interwoven, which is intuitively clear. But the question is then, where do you put the focus? So I think, because we will provide the show notes with a lot of interesting links, I think it's a good moment to show the distinctive features of life itself. Let's say the cohorts of the prototypes and the experiments you have run already, and also sketch where you sense the difference to other cultural change initiatives, because I think like that it becomes more tangible to then, you know, towards you know, later in the podcast really give hands-on examples, what happens on the ground, how can people get engaged, and so forth.
Do you want to share a little bit about, like, I mean, or I can...
I'll let you start.
Well, so maybe just to start with an intriguing question for myself, which was that there are, I think, kind of ancestors I just want to acknowledge here. So one is obviously integral and all of the things around that, which I think have come out of that. But also, I would say, like, engaged Buddhism for me. I'm a Zen Buddhist. I'm hugely inspired. You know, we based our hub at the moment. It's very near Plum Village, Thich Nhat Hanh's kind of root temple, root monastery. I suppose one thing I was a bit intrigued about, like, lots of amazing things came out of Integral, but it was a bit like there was this incredible theory, but then, like, what was the practice? You know, like, where were the Integral communities? Where were the teal communities? And I think it's one of these examples where, you know, the other
That's
metaphor...
why we're having the conversation.
Yeah. It is like, the thing I came to think is that it's like playing the piano. You can read about how to play a concert pianist, be a concert pianist, or play like Glenn Gould. But then the practice of doing it is like, there's not really a shortcut. It's hard. So one of the things, I guess, at life itself is also, I just want to acknowledge so much humbleness. Like, we are not coming with like the answers or we've worked this out. But I think at least the inquiries or the questions that we have come to, and some of the experiments and experience we've had, was like, okay, well, how, one is just a consistent focus on how can we and then others learn about how we actually practice, particularly in the collective, that combines presence, purpose, and practice. So that integral, you know, in that sense. So let me get specific about that, which is, lots of people talk about interbeing or interconnectedness. We have like hundreds of people now. We have come through this hub here in Bergerac where we've come to a model of like running weeks to months residencies. And one of the reasons we were like, we are not doing week workshops if we can, is people kind of week workshops. They have an incredible time. They leave. They tell you it's amazing. You have them there for a month. By week 3, almost always there will be a conflict. And in my view, that's where growth actually happens. Like, you come out of a workshop thinking, wow, you know, I've really worked this out. But it's when you actually get in a conflict with someone else, or everyone here does collective care at least for 1 hour a day, where they come together to cook or clean. I mean, the amount of stuff people come, we talk. I for myself, I'm into interbeing, but no, I've got a call then. I've got my Zoom call then. I've got my whatever, or I don't like getting up at that time, or you suddenly have to deal with that very practical and very real parts of my being that do not want to transform, you know, and the developmental edge there. So one of the things that I get a bit more specific is, I think we are at a moment when we can do a lot of learning as humanity, and a bit more rigorously. This is an aspect of life itself that's like science informed and intuition informed about what works. So what contemplative practices work? What shadow practices work? What collective practices work? And they're not going to work for everyone. But really, that's the other thing that we've done intensively here at the Hub, is run quite a lot of different practices and look at what ecologies of practices work together. So again, they might be familiar, but we, you know, there's a convergence, like a lot of people like IFS as one practice, internal family systems, that combined with, you know, Dharma sharing or like sharing, combined with, you know, certain collective practices and collective decision making. Just to kind of, what I'm saying there is, if we're serious then about how do we actually create transformational conscious collectives, we're really in our infancy about learning what works and what works for a given person, what works for a given group. You know, I joke that if we could get one group of 10 people that didn't fall out for 10 years, we could change the world. You know, there's this Margaret Mead quote, you know, 10 determined people or whatever. But, you know, really, you know, I see so many amazing initiatives I've been involved in that have basically broken down for personal conflict or other reasons. Like, just these very concrete, practical stuff. Like, we can get better at managing and healing and transforming conflict and using it as compost for our inner growth versus basically a tragedy of collaboration, would be huge. And it's something that I think we've got a little bit better at life itself. There's still massive distance to go. But that's one example of like running these hubs where we actually, people come and live, We ran one in Berlin, in London, 2 here now in Bergerac in France, over the last 10 years, but something like 7, 8 years.
Sylvie, what I'm super curious. So when you sense into the complexity and the entangled nature of all of these cohorts of activists and artists and impact entrepreneurs and mystics and whatnot, and try to tie into Rufus, instead of complaining and trashing it all, use it as compost to nourish the new culture. What are maybe 1 or 2 or 3 examples where you said, oh, things got really difficult or messy, but this is where the growth happened?
Well, I can speak very personally, which, for example, my desire to live more in community also comes from a deep wound of feeling separated from community, because I'm half French, half Taiwanese, and I really experienced that sense of community as a child. And there was a deep longing of wanting to revive that. And also I was bullied as a kid, and so wanting to feel accepted and belonging.
When you came to France, basically,
Yes. And I believe that actually for many of us, it's some parts of our wounds that also cause us to wanting to heal ourselves and maybe fix the world. Because then if things, for me, it was like, if I can fix that, then I'll be fine. And actually the very fact that I had that wound caused more sometimes wounds in myself and in others. Specifically, and it took me a while to realize, so for example, I want to live in community, but I get very triggered in community because my nervous system constantly feel like threatened by others, because I've in my early childhood felt like, okay, I don't belong, groups are dangerous because I'm not accepted. So then I'm putting myself in community because I long for belonging, but then my nervous system is like completely freaked out because I haven't healed that. And then how I show up in community is like this kind of, because my nervous system and my subconscious perceive that as a threat. And that's not fostering community. It's actually potentially like, it's disruptive. And the thing is, all of us come with something. So, and I had to therefore adjust, between where I want to go. I would love to live in this kind of transformative neighborhood where people are really committed to the work and there's children and we're kind of in the almost kibbutsian artistic paradise, and the reality of my development, right? Like where I'm actually at in my ability to show up and do the work and etc. And to live a life to continue fostering that and not be attached that it will happen or not. Because otherwise I always set myself to failure in comparison to that place where I want to get, where then everything will be okay. To find places, to build pockets where things are okay how they are right now, and I can grow and develop with how they are right now. And really owning that watching that shadow so it doesn't own me versus because that shadow can own me versus me owning it, having it. And it's still something I'm
Can I tie into that,
yes,
Sylvie?
of course.
Yeah. So and specifically tying into that, Sylvie, but maybe after that, Rufus can riff off of that. One of my core takeaways, for which I don't have a clear answer, is that I sense a lot of people from classical eco-villages to the more modern forms of community life or these longer cohorts often conflate or misinterpret their own individual shadow work with the sense of belonging to a community, and then things get really messy. So I wonder, since you shared from yourself, Sylvie, if you could abstract from your own perception to how has that unfolded through the various cohorts you have been hosting? Because I imagine people coming together where then the center of gravity of consciousness of some of the people, pulls the whole level down, right? Instead of, let's say, healthy, semi-healthy, whatever, normal neurotic adults that then say, "Oh, that's an experiment. It's a month. Let's try the best." So, Sylvie, curious, how was your own process reflected with yourself being part of the hosts? And what are other features from other people that you met throughout the different cohorts you have been organizing? And are there some common threads?
Yes. Well,
I guess
one is so you have we have our personal shadows, our individual shadows of our personal stories, but there's also collective shadows, things that you see, certain trends that regardless who's there, these things happen.
You want to give examples?
And so concretely, like, I saw a lot of reactivity towards any sense of hierarchy and authority. So
do you want to be concrete about it?
Yeah, I'm trying to be.
I can give some if you want.
It's so I would like concretely, I would come on a call and say, okay, this is how we're gonna run things, in this hub. These are the set of, for example, vows. This is the program, and there would often be kind of a backlash of like, oh, we feel imposed on, or who are you to tell us? We want to do it ourselves. And there was a real sense of like, for me, frustration, because like I'm not doing it to impose it. It's because that comes from a deep experience that I think you would benefit from. And also I saw a lot of like projection around kind of almost parenting figures, because when you're in maybe a position of hierarchy, authority, you also represent for a lot of people what were authoritative figures, so, and their work, but also their parental figure, and actually, we used to say, your relationship with your parents matters to us.
Yes.
Because if, for example, you had a lot of conflict with your parents, you are not like, it's really,
you're incomplete with your parents.
You're incomplete with them. I'm not saying you need to be best friend, but you're really incomplete. Guess what? You're going to project that into your love relationship and to any figure that has a kind of authority, right? And that's going to show up, it might be, very submissive because I always listen to my mom, or it might be like, oh, and then
screw my dad.
He was an asshole. You're an asshole. And I just saw that amplify your relationship with your parents matters to us because it shows up in how you show up.
Yeah.
And so there's and there's also a general cultural shadows, which is, I think we're experiencing a cultural shadows of like huge amount of reactivity around authority. So it gets amplified. So maybe that individual person already has that, but it gets even more amplified because I saw that regardless who was in the leadership position,
this is what's crucial. Yeah.
Leadership position, they always got the same type of, pardon my French, but shit.
Let me try to tie into that. So I think what got me really excited with the background of the white paper is that you have run like many cohorts through these different programs. And it seems there are some, I would call them Gordian knots, in this community experience to like unpack, facilitate, and change maybe also the process design on a deeper level. And this is a continuous learning process. So I know when we started the podcast, it became abundantly clear that this podcast is not intended to give one well-proven framework and this is exactly the way cultural evolution works, because it seems that culture follows different axioms. It's not like, okay, like I said, you build like a photovoltaic roof and then you adjust it like physicists do, and you change more towards the sunlight. It seems that cultural evolution per se is a more messy process where both the individuals themselves as well as the cultural container are like interwoven in somewhat mysterious ways. I would like to use another framework that I very, very consciously and often use in this podcast, and it's called the Horizon 1, 2, 3 framework. And just to give reference to the framework for those listening in, Horizon 1 basically means, what do you want to accomplish in the near future? Where are you standing and what do you aim to accomplish in the near future? Whereas a Horizon 2 may be an iteration on a product, or in that sketched example of the cohorts in Bergerac, how do you change the process design? What are the tweaks for 2025 or maybe 2026? And then a Horizon 3 would be, okay, imagine you can play a pivotal role in facilitating cultural change, and it really has deeper ripple effects on a larger societal level, then you would maybe look at a 10-year time frame or so. So I'm curious how you would apply that when you look into the rear view mirror of life itself and the multiple cohorts run and so forth. And then just make it an open-ended conversation, Horizon 1, 2, 3 of life itself, through the rearview mirror and looking into the crystal ball into the future. Just curious to listen into that, and specifically trying to put an emphasis, like, what are the ripple effects beyond those, like, let's say, boundary settings of those people in the cohorts that are joining you in Bergerac?
Yeah, I think maybe even to Horizon 3 and come backwards. In the Second Renaissance kind of second white paper, which is on the kind of how this comes about, there's this idea of these pockets that form, of where the future paradigm is sort of being tried out, experimented with, these kind of hotbeds of cultural evolution and inner development and outer practice. And there's also the formation of movement. So the basic thesis is what happens is you have these kind of pockets forming, maybe they network together, but also at the same time, there's this kind of movement gathering where people start to self-identify, or, the pockets are not just like isolate, they're like, oh, we're part of something bigger. So the basic theory of change that life itself is committed to, and at the moment, is that like nurturing these seeds of a second renaissance, both this movement and these pockets. So not just this hub is a prototype, but more generally, we're interested in just like helping others and help there being more of these pockets. And that could be businesses, it could be online groups, it could be physical things. There's a reason why we think physical co-living, the intensity, even if it's in a neighborhood or a village, the intensity and the regularity of interaction is pretty crucial to maintaining this being different, because fundamentally you are basically in a somewhat hostile environment. Like the mainstream society, the mainstream world don't believe these things so much. It's harder to make a living. It's harder to sustain your practice. It's not like this is common. So fundamentally, more pockets connected together, transformative regions, even that would be a dream, and a budding movement. So the question would be, how does that, kind of stepping back through the horizons, like 30, 40, 50 years from now, if there were dozens of regions all over the world which are like kind of pioneering a second renaissance, if there's a growing global or local movement of people with obviously a great variation of perspectives, but like, wow, we want a paradigmatic shift, we know that the inner dimension is crucial, etc., that would be amazing. And then like, well, how does that start? And then coming back through Horizon 2 and 1 is, well, you need more of these spaces to start up, and you need more people to come to those kind of spaces or find out about them or believe they should be created. And that's where even like the second Renaissance white paper is kind of like, it loops on itself. It's both setting out a vision, but one of the reasons we even chose the term second Renaissance, because there are about 8 synonyms in this space for similar things, meta-crisis, meta-modern, integral, teal, second tier, great turning, hollow movement, etc., liminal web. Just as we see that we need to make this space, how do movements on begin? We see more and more people out there who are hungry, who are desperate, who like young people, old people who sense, I talked to my 80-year-old mother. She's like, what's going on? Things are really not working. She senses this. She lives in Britain. We talk to many young people coming through the hub, and in the 20s and 30s. There's this hunger, but it's not very accessible. So one thing of the second Renaissance, even as a term, was if I say it to most people, they have at least a guess of what it means, at least in the West. If I say something like meta-modern, I have to spend 5 minutes explaining it, which is great and valuable, but just so one is, how do we make this in the near term more accessible? How do we make these ideas, and how do we create kind of gateways and integrous, reliable gateways for people who are sensing something's deeply off to find their way to this kinds of paths forward? And that's even why the second Renaissance name, why setting out a simple white paper in itself is something we're doing. And the second Renaissance project is trying to be that beacon among many. There are several other beacons, and show people where else they can go into this space when they arrive, because it's very confusing often. So that's one part. And that's also crucial to people also believing that they can live differently, that they can organize differently. So yeah, I think that's kind of part 2. And do you want to say something to add to that, or have I covered the kind of Horizon 3 back to 1 pretty well?
That's great.
Thank you.
Sylvie, what I'm curious towards the end of the podcast is, in a summary, for me, it's theory and practice. So theory actually in practice, personal development, cultural development. There's a hub in Bergerac. I would like to ask you, how can people engage? What are your needs? What would be, if you had a magic wand, a wish you want to speak out to some of the listeners who may want to join? And maybe finally, what is the biggest wish you have as being part of the organizers team, to give like, to put more like maybe throttle, more energy into the system for it to really like move from seedling to sapling to, you know, an old blossoming tree that gives fruit, you know, as a, yeah, to really give fruit to cultural change.
Yes. Well, obviously, I long for finding others who really want to commit to the path, who want to live it day in, day out, you know, and live together into a neighborhood where, you know, taking really at heart your inner growth uh, is part of a deep aspiration and daily practice. And so, you know, there's so many things that needs to be done, and you know, I don't have enough of several lifetime to fulfill on them. But I would say, yeah, start by probably for people trying it out for themselves, like, you know, trying to trying different practices to help them deal with conflict better. I would say, you know, are you able to heal conflict within your own family? That's a big one, you know, because every families have some, like, you know, things that you put under the carpet. And why I talk about families is sometimes we have a bit like, oh, let's transform the world out there, but we don't take care of, like, some are, you know, the deepest buried um, skeletons. And but they're the one that haunts us this most, you know, like, you don't deal with that, you're gonna have to deal, you know, you can choose to deal with them or not, but they're gonna be here. I have a great invitation for people to kind of like look at their the ghost that in the closet that haunts them, and do it with others. Do it with others who also want to do that, so that you have support. Concretely, yeah, you can. There's obviously coming to the hub with different residency, trying it out. We're generally also looking for kind of like people who want to volunteers or and work with us.
There's a second Renaissance courses.
There's a second Renaissance course that we're doing to also just connecting with others who might have similar interests, seeing if that type of crowd, that type of people have a resonance. I'm particularly really interested in art of the second Renaissance. So, which is to start an art collective who would really kind of make art as a collective to foster and nourish the embodiment of that culture through our artistic expressions. There's a you know, there's like actually building, you know, spaces, making sure they're sustainable financially, but also psycho-emotionally. You know, there's a billion things that can be done, not just at life itself, but even if they exist out there in the world, that they're not, you know, you know, there's
I mean, I would also say systematically in this space is massively underfunded, I would say. Like, there's almost, you know, I raised funds before at Open Knowledge Foundation and others, and whether for Life Itself or many others I see in the space would benefit. It's to the extent, funnily enough, it's like there's, yeah, just like the number of philanthropic people or even high net worth or anything else I see in the space. There's now stuff on like spiritual, I would say, coming in, or like funding retreat centers, but this overlap of inner transformation and systemic change, like that integration, really kind of uncommon, and particularly like, yeah. So just to say, whether for lives or others, are just like that makes a difference. But fundamentally, I'd say people more, you know, we say is like pioneers of a second Renaissance, or, you know, and that doesn't mean to be at life itself. We really see building a network, you know, this having your song sung back to you. I think I see so many people also who come in. Sometimes it's sadly like it's hard. You know, I've been an activist in my past. Many activists burn out. There's maybe this isn't activism, this is something kind of different. I don't want to call it contemplative activism, we used to say. But really, the other thing is like, find the others, try and find other people. And yeah, you want to add?
Yeah, it's like find the others. And I would say, find the others who want to do it with you. And that is, in a way, it's not about you as an individual. It's about something greater. And that there's there's accountability held. Because I think, how can you, we all say we're committed to transformation, but how, and a new paradigm, but you only know if you measure. It's like, I want to lose weight. But if I never weight myself, how do I know I'm losing weight? You gotta, like, you might be standing on the scale or trying to put that one jeans over and over again, but you gotta measure it against something to know if you're progressing. And that means accountability. You can't be held accountable, not like as a blaming, but like, oh, am I against what I'm up to? How am I doing? And you need each other to hold each other accountable, because for human being held accountable can feel very burdensome, like, oh, I'm bad, I'm a failure, and etc. And it's like, they can hold that lightly for you to, so that you can fall on your face and get up again, and you are held lovingly accountable to your greater aspiration, that you're seen for not those moments where you're having a crisis and a breakdown and an identity attack, but for like actually your bigger self of what you deeply aspire to. And we forget, like, I am like a goldfish, one turn around, a little breakdown, and I'm like, and I need others to tell me, like, it's possible, and you can keep growing. It's possible for us as a collective, but it's possible for also us individually. And it's very hard to maintain hope when you're disconnected from your peers. We need each other.
Yeah,
Yeah, I feel like almost like, for me, my closing words had another really deep epiphany, Rufus and Sylvie, which really strikes me. There's also a part in me that really hurts me, is we basically see funds, like funds in the broadest sense, from philanthropic money to angel to scaling capital to whatever typology of capital, flowing into systems change and personal transformation. Personal transformation is a rather recent issue, but there's a lot of retreat centers opening, be it plant medicine, psychotherapy. But it's really interesting, it really strikes a very deep chord, that the intersection of systemic transformation, cultural transformation, and personal transformation has distinctive features which spill over into the other quote-unquote quadrants, let's just call them different aspects of life itself, that's heavily underfunded. So one core takeaway is actually, what can other spaces, meaning physical spaces, people that own retreat centers, that own castles, that own hotels, learn from life itself, so that these mentioned chrysalis cells that you have been nurturing in Bergerac can really disseminate, propagate, and just attract more people. So having said that, I feel like handing over almost like to closing words. I don't mind who starts. I was really touched by the mix and the complementarity of the masculine and the feminine, the very soft, artsy, and the very theoretically structured parts of the conversation. So is there a gift, a main takeaway, something that you will want to still underline or highlight as a checkout? And I just hand this into the room, and I don't mind who starts for like checking out, and maybe some last words from both of you.
Well, first for me, I actually want to start by just the gratitude and expression that, for example, the Second Renaissance project itself, while life itself have played a major role, is the collaboration with many, many contributors a whole bunch of advisors. I could name all of them, but Daniel Thorson, Ali Biner, Carl Stayet, many others who are who advisors, and there's core curator team, and also at Life itself. We're fundamentally a collective. Today, Sylvie and I are here kind of representing us. We are co-founders, but just the immense appreciation for everyone else, both in Life itself and beyond, in this kind of, I think, emerging movement, who stand for the hope and the possibility of what can happen for humanity. Whether it's in what I call sometimes the golden second renaissance, where we avert the major breakdowns, or even what I sometimes call the dark renaissance. There's still a renaissance, but we have a dark period to go through. But just all the inspiration and the ancestors I stand on, that I appreciate. So I just want to say that for me and check out, is just really say this is a collective and team endeavor, and many people at Life itself and beyond have contributed, and that there is hope. That I even sense that, funny enough, that the fact we're in a moment of, I think, kind of increasing social and kind of cultural breakdown in a way, like modernity is coming to an end. The example I think of is in personal transformation. When you talk to many people, the moment they actually really grew or they really took action was sadly often when there was some confronting circumstance. A parent died, like as in my case, they got divorced, something happened to their child, tragically, but interestingly, often that is the catalyst for serious personal growth. And I think that's also true socially. If we look back at the first Renaissance, it happened after the Black Death and the breakdown of the 14th century and all of this. And there were many challenges also in the Renaissance. But just to say, I feel that there's an aspect which is that we can also look at this as an incredible opportunity. Even the climate crisis and all these things that we would much prefer to be doing much wiser action, is that they may catalyze us into the profound shift in human consciousness and culture that we really need for the planet, to be good stewards, to be good caretakers, to build the regenerative civilization we know in our hearts is possible.
What would I say to leave? Personally, I feel there's two very important shadows for myself. What I see is shadow work. Is like, can we deal with conflict, wisely? Can we heal conflict? Can we get complete? Because when I look at the political landscape, there's a deep need for deep listening. It breaks my heart to see our inability to listen. So I would say, there's that dimension that I see that is really important. Spaces for listening, so that healing can happen, and so that we can relate to conflict as something that can be growth versus a tearing down. And also looking at our own cognitive dissonance and illusions, that reality, spirituality. If you look at the word spirituality, it has kind of two sounds in it. It has the sounds of reality, and it has the sound of spiritual, of ritual. And I would leave with, like, spirituality is embracing and making a dance with reality. So that's why I will leave with.
Yeah, I'm really touched. I think I want to close with one word, and that is hope. Thanks, Rufus. Thanks, Sylvie. Thanks so much for the deep conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alistair.